All right. So, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining today's conversation. My name is Yetty Williams, and I'm the founder and CEO of LagosMums, which is a community that has grown out of Lagos, Nigeria, and now to the diaspora and globally. And the goal of the community is really to support parents raising children in the digital age, navigating screen time, navigating digital citizenship, and what our role in that is. I'm very excited today because we have a guest, Jim Knight, and we're going to be having a conversation around the online safety bill, digital citizenship, and basically what we need to have in the back of our minds as we are raising digital natives in a world that continues to be very, very heavy on digital technologies. And sometimes as parents, we don't always feel very well equipped, right, to navigate this space of this world with our children. All right, so our guest today is Jim Knight. He is the Right Honorable Lord Knight of Weymouth. Jim Knight works in education, digital technology, and as a legislator. He's the director of Sukla Limited, providing advice to clients in education. Jim is the chair of trust board of E-Act Multi-Academy Trust, and he's a chair designate of the Council of British International Schools. He is a board member of Century Tech, Macat International, and Educate Ventures Research Limited. He sits on advisory bodies for Nord Anglia Education, Person, and BETT, or BET, I believe. As a government minister and MP, Jim's portfolios included rural affairs, schools, digital, and employment. He was a member of Gordon Brown's cabinet before joining the Lords in 2010. He regularly speaks in the Lords on education and technology policy. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you very much, and thanks so much for inviting me to come along and talk to you at LagosMums. It's an amazing network that you built, Yetty, so I'm really proud to be here.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks for being here. And what an amazing profile you have and the amazing things you've done. And I wanted to just ask you, before we get into it too deeply, how did you navigate into this space of being in that intersection between education and digital technologies?
Well, I guess I'd always, before I was a politician, I was involved in publishing, and one of the things that I managed to successfully help us do as a publisher was move from a print-based business to a much more digitally based business. So I've always been interested in what technology can do and the power of technology, and that stayed with me. So when Tony Blair asked me to be schools minister back in 2006, which I did for 3 years, one of the things that I took a real interest in was how technology can be an enabler for better teaching and learning. Now, obviously, that's an ever-changing landscape with most recently generative AI. But I think we've also seen, as technology has become all-pervasive, and in particular, the smartphone has become pervasive, that there are almost as many downsides as there are upsides. I remember as schools minister visiting Apple in Cupertino, and they just brought out the iPhone, and I was begging them to let me have a look, and they hadn't released it to the public at that point, and so they weren't willing to let me see what it was like. So that just tells you the distance that we've travelled since I was schools minister, and did that visit probably in about 2007-8.
Wow. And from that time to now, what would you say are some of the, I guess, not shocking is not the word, but I like how you said, there are almost equal upsides and downsides, right? Pros and cons to the digital age that we live in. What would you say you've seen as a trend in terms of how it's continuing to change the world as we know it?
Well, I was riding on the London Underground yesterday on the tube, and took a moment not looking at my phone to look at all the other passengers, and reflecting that 10, 15 years ago, most people on that tube carriage would have been reading a newspaper. And now they were all looking at their phones. And the phone, the smartphone, has become a natural extension of ourselves in many ways. So, lots of us struggle to navigate our way around a city without using a phone. Lots of us struggle to not just keep in touch with each other, but to keep current. I do most of my consumption of the news on my phone. There's When I'm curious about something, I can research it really quickly and easily on my phone. I'm looking for a birthday present for my wife, whose birthday is a week on Monday. And so now my browsing history is full of dresses and other things that I might want to buy for Claude. These are all positives and make life really convenient. But at the same time, and worth saying, for learning, it's a fantastic opportunity that we struggle with because of the downsides, and the downsides are really led by social media, where I think it started out with Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg as a student dropping out, as a perfectly benign idea that would just connect students on a campus. His problem, ironically, because I think she's a good person, came when Sheryl Sandberg was hired with all of her expertise in advertising in Google. And suddenly, Facebook became a really important business. And once it became a business, then the algorithm that is behind what you see on your news feed started to be configured around what kept you engaged, so that you could then sell more advertising, collect more data. And that's what they all do. And that business model of we'll just feed you whatever you want, whatever engages you, is really dangerous, because we've known for years and years, for decades, that tabloid journalism, which is normally in the gutter, it's normally full of horror stories and sex and crime and all the bad stuff that's going on in the world, that sells newspapers. And so it shouldn't be any surprise to us that the algorithm gives us all of the bad stuff and shares what each other are saying that's less positive about each other rather than what's more positive, because in the end, that's what we read. And unfortunately, what that then means is it's become a really dark place for particularly children. And that's what we should be talking about.
Right. That analogy you made is really, really powerful in terms of essentially no responsible parent or caregiver or educator would want a child or young people consuming tabloids every single day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, unfiltered, continuously. And, when you're reading a paper, it's even there's some action in that. You're physically picking it up, you're flipping the pages, and at a point, it's going to end. The paper is going to finish, right? You're going to get to the end of the paper and you're going to drop it. The difference now is there's no end to it. It's continuously feeding you. And, there's a term I've recently come across in terms of the work that I do around the concept of the algorithm is actually able to radicalize users. And that comes from the perspective that whatever you continuously feed on is going to paint a picture of your view of the world. So if all you're being fed, like in your example of looking for a present for your wife, and now you're seeing dresses and flowers and all kinds of consistently coming into your feed because the algorithms are made to be that efficient to continue to serve you more of what you've clicked on, that's essentially the world our young children, young adults are growing up in.
Absolutely. And we've all experienced that spooky thing where we don't think we've actually gone online and looked for something. We've just talked to someone about it in a room, and suddenly it starts appearing on your feed adverts for this thing that you've been talking about, and you kind of go, are they listening to us? And
Mm.
and that's we've all experienced it, and it's a bit freaky when it happens. And for children to grow up without the privacy, without struggling to turn it off, feeling like they're being excluded if they don't have it on 24/7, that they're missing out, that their peers will be talking about them behind their back. What it then means is there's no respite if you're being bullied, if you're online, because that will carry on through the night. It means that if you are anxious, um, you can become depressed because the algorithm feeds your anxiety, and that can then take you into a very dark place in mental health terms. And sadly, I've met parents who've been the victims of suicide and self-harm in terms of their children taking their own lives and causing themselves irreparable damage. And that's obviously what parents are really worried about. They're worried about the extreme end, and could that happen to my child? Could that happen in my home? They're worried about the less extreme end. They're just worried about their children not getting out, not getting enough exercise, not getting enough sleep. We all know, sleep's the time when the body recovers. Sleep's the time when the learning is processed in the brain. Sleep, if you want to do well, if you want to grow healthy and happy, you've got to get a good night's sleep. And if you've got a device by your bedside or under your pillow that's vibrating and pinging and is where there's a lot of noise, possibly about you going on, you're not going to get much sleep, and then you'll spiral further downwards. And I think because as parents we didn't grow up with it. Now, as I said, the smartphone came along in the late noughties, so it's been around 15 years. Well, there aren't many 15-year-old parents around, and so we didn't grow up with it, and so we don't know what it's like. We don't really know what to do.
Mm. Yeah, that's a really, really, that's really the reality of it. Is just parents have always raised children based on what they knew and what they experienced as a child growing up. So
Yeah.
the tension we have now is so deep because indeed we are probably the last generation who are parents today who remember a life pre-digital. So, trying to raise children in a world where we didn't grow up on this. We don't know how to guide them because a lot of us we have no idea. We've been using digital technologies as adults. And there's such a marked difference between using it as an adult who hopefully your prefrontal cortex is fully developed. So you're supposed to make all those executive decisions because you're logically thinking through. But for a child who has not had those lived experiences, they're having to live and learn as they go. And that's what makes it so much more dangerous and scary, really, if we look at it that way.
Yeah. And two things to that. One is, again, back in that pre-smartphone era when I had responsibility for schools, one of the things that we would be saying to parents in terms of media literacy was all about the television. And it was all about make sure you know what your child is watching. We did have the internet a bit then, and so keep an eye on what your child is watching so that it's safe. It's much harder now when we've got these personal devices in bedrooms, and much harder to keep an eye on what our child is consuming. The other thing I'd say, which I think is really important, is when you talk to young people themselves about this, consistently, the first thing they say is, you know what I'd really like? I just want my mum and dad to put their phone down. Because that they want the attention of their parents.
Mm-hmm.
And for too many, it feels like their parents are paying more attention to their phone. They're probably on their phones asking Google what to do about parenting their child who's spending too much time on their phones. But the the reality is we've all got things to learn. We're all learning as we go along about how to navigate this world, uh, and we're battling against addictive algorithms.
Absolutely. Our children, you're absolutely right. When we talk about family digital well-being plans, it needs to include how everybody is going to be using digital for good, positively, and that includes the parents. So if there's never a moment
Yeah,
in the house, you don't have parts of the house or times in the day when everybody's off their devices, making eye contact, communicating,
yeah,
talking. Children are watching that, and if that seems to be the new way of the world, is to always have a device in your palm, always at a moment to send a chat to
yeah.
somebody and connect. It's very difficult. It almost seems hypocritical, right, when parents are saying your children are always on your phone, but mom and dad are doing the exact same thing. So
That's right. And
yeah.
yeah, 4 or 5 years. Yeah, we've got a 12-year-old Coco at home. Yeah, who's amazing. And 4 or 5 years ago, she came to Claude and I and said, um, "We need to have some rules about digital." So the three of us took 2 or 3 days to devise our digital code of conduct, and it still applies. And so, as a family, we aim to sit around and have a meal together at the table every day. And devices are not allowed at the table when we're eating. We're not even allowed to ask Alexa a question. So it's a digital free zone, so that we talk to each
Mm,
other. We ask each other how our day was. Um, you know, what did each of us learn today? All of those proper questions that families have around the dinner table, uninterrupted. We also have a rule that we're not allowed to post pictures of each other on social media without consent.
mm,
And we have a rule that we're not allowed to take our devices up to bed with us at night.
mm.
So all devices have to be downstairs in the charging cupboard overnight. And those rules have worked pretty well for us. The one that's now hardest for Coco is we also have said you're not allowed on any of the social media until you are of the age stated in the terms and conditions, not the age on the App Store, because it's often different.
Mm,
So that means, for example, that Coco, age 12, is 4 years away from being allowed on WhatsApp when every one of her classmates is on WhatsApp, because it's 16 is the terms and conditions age to be on WhatsApp, because it's private messaging and fully encrypted. So law enforcement authorities cannot see whether or not a child is being groomed by an adult. They cannot see what's going on. It's a potentially dangerous place. And that's why it's a 16 and over platform. And we enforce that. And that's hard on Coco, because that very few other parents do the same.
and I think that brings us to a really important point, and we're going to start segueing into this conversation. Actually, is when you think about social media, when you think about screens and devices, depending on who the parent is, they might not think WhatsApp is dangerous. They might think, oh, that's not social media.
No.
That's just, for
Yeah,
communication. We need to have it for our
yeah,
family group chat. So they might think
yeah,
something like, the other socials like Snapchat and Instagram and TikTok and all of them are more dangerous. But actually, when you have those conversations and you're like, do you understand what WhatsApp itself, how it's everything you've just said? Parents suddenly say, oh my goodness, that's like putting my child in the
yeah,
middle of the most dangerous place in the world and saying good luck. Nobody would do that,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And I feel like so much of the work, unfortunately, has been put unfairly on parents to try and figure out how to keep their children safe in a
yeah,
dispensation where they cannot be everywhere. They don't even understand what they're protecting them from, you know? So I want us to
yeah.
start talking about the online safety bill, which I know you had a lot of experience with, and to just talk about the fact that that's starting to come up. I would like to get your perspective first, though, in terms of why now? Why does it seem like suddenly around the world, policymakers, the government, people are starting to rise up to say we need to protect our young ones online after almost 10 years, if you will? of leaving it wide open like the Wild West. So can we talk about that?
Yeah, it's a good starting point, isn't it? I think why now is almost a way of asking why haven't we done this sooner?
Absolutely.
Because in many ways, I think parents legitimately would say, as you've just said, Yetty, um, how come we're left to navigate this and try and make up the rules? Isn't there a role for government to have made it safer for children already? And the truth is, in my country here in the UK, we have been working on this for 5 years, since the first proposals came from government, and government then have realised it's really complicated. Um, it's less complicated for children. It's more complicated in terms of the responsibility to adults.
Mm.
And you've also got to then think about whether you create a big cliff edge. So children are potentially in this wonderful, safe, walled garden online, and then suddenly on their 18th birthday, all the terrors of the world are let in. And is that right? Too, that's tricky. So, and once it comes to adults, what you've got to balance is freedom of expression and freedom of speech with safety. If you took an example that's controversial, the issue of transsexuals is one where individuals who are themselves trans feel that they are being harmed by some of the posts on social media by people like J.K. Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter series, where she is advocating for safe places for women, um, safe from potentially people who say that they're trans but aren't really, they're predatory men. Now, that's really complicated and that's really harsh. And should you have a regulator or the tech company being told that they've got to protect the trans individuals, or do they protect the freedom of speech of someone like J.K. Rowling to advocate for safe spaces for women? There's not an easy answer to that question. So it's taken too long because we've been trying to wrestle with those difficult moral dilemmas around protecting, if you like, democratic values of free speech, freedom of expression, alongside protecting people from harm. So in the end, what we did with the online safety bill, and this shift happened a couple of years ago, was we decided to really focus on making children safe online and try and make the UK the safest place in the world to grow up as a child. And then introduce a few protections for adults, particularly women, but not go too far on that because of the need to protect freedom of speech. Now, we're not alone. I think parents and the public around the world, in Europe, in Australia, in Canada, in New Zealand, in the United States, to name but a few that I know a bit more about, they've been clamoring for something to be done. And so governments in those places have been starting to move in that direction. And indeed, the EU has got some pretty powerful legislation to protect people online. They've done a little bit differently to the online safety bill, but they've got some pretty powerful stuff that's forcing technology companies to change some of their behaviors.
Right. I guess, a start is a start, even if it feels like it's coming, unfortunately quite late. And I think if when you look at it, whenever there's a new innovation, right, or something introduced, there's always going to be a period of time where it takes everybody to figure out what the rules around it is. And I remember when I did a course a few years ago, one of these free online courses by Jeffrey Sachs, that talked about the
Yeah.
different industrialization ages. And when you look at what happened from the first to the second to the third to the fourth, it's quite fascinating from that perspective that every new innovation is good and bad. It has, opportunities and challenges, right? And unfortunately, sometimes it feels like nothing is being done, but it's because the people behind the scenes are grappling with figuring out how are we going to make this work for humanity, for the best of humanity.
Yeah. Yeah. There's some great graphs that essentially show something that looks a bit like DNA going up like that, but where you have uh, technological waves of technological progress, and then they're interlocked with social pain before you get social gain. So the new technology creates this trauma socially, and then we resolve it, and then all the gains of the new technology then play out. And that's been a regular pattern through the ages. And I guess we are living through that with social media, and we'll live through it again with artificial intelligence.
Yeah. Thanks, Jim. I want to ask you a bit more specifically around the online safety bill here in the UK.
Yeah.
What do you believe is the potential impact on being able to promote online safety for children and families? I note what you said, where one of the goals is to make the UK the safest place for children to grow up, and with a view on their, with interaction to digital. So what do you believe really will be the potential impact, and how can it really promote safety for children and families?
Well, what the bill has done is it's introduced some new criminal offences. So things like cyber flashing, airdropping dick pics, as they're known colloquially. When you're on public transport or whatever, and that's a new offence. There's more offences in respect of grooming children online, in respect of allowing content related to suicide and self-harm to be circulated to children. There's a range of there's about five. Yeah, there's another one in respect of deliberately triggering epileptic seizures by sharing flashing image content and targeting that at individuals with epilepsy. Um, there's some new offences, and that's straightforward. But then we've empowered the regulator, who are called Ofcom, with a lot of duties now and big fining powers to essentially work with the technology companies, the social media companies, and the search companies to ensure that children, well, first of all, that we know that whether or not someone's a child online, so that then we can ensure that they don't see pornographic content, so they don't see any of this content that we've made illegal, so that the algorithm is not there to do them harm. It is a safe place for children. We've given Ofcom the powers to go in and have a look at the effect of algorithms, to have a look inside the black box, if you like, that's difficult to penetrate. We've said if technology companies do not do as they're told by the regulator, they can be fined up to 10% of their global turnover. And if you are Meta, the owner of Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp, that's a lot of money, 10% of global turnover, and an imprisonable offence for your senior director in the UK. Those are really big sanctions that we've got in place that will make people sit up and take notice, I think, which will take a little bit of time for Ofcom to roll out, because they have to essentially publish codes of practice for all these different things, consult on them, and then the technology companies publish their own risk assessments against those codes of practice, which then are what Ofcom regulates. So there's a whole bit of process. So I think it'll take 2 or 3 years to make a big difference to children, but then I think children will be a lot safer online than they have been.
Yeah, those are some really big moves indeed. And I'm currently enrolled in a cyber psychology course, which I'll be wrapping up next week. It's been a 6-month intense course, and it's really what cyber psychology is looking at is a couple of things. One is how humans interact with the digital technologies, how human interacts with themselves, on digital technologies, and how digital technology, social media, and all of that affects the humans themselves who are consuming it. So it's looking at a couple of different ways of how we're all impacted. And some of the things you said, for example, cyber flashing, grooming children, content that, leads to suicide, ideation, things like that. It's unfortunate because even though, yes, we've started the journey, it might still take 2 or 3 years to get to the place of enforcement, right? But we still have a period of time where we do know there's a lot of stuff that's bad for young adults, that's bad for teenagers. So I want to start talking about, while we're waiting for the enforcement to start to happen, what can parents glean from this? Because I feel like this is a moment where parents can say, you know what, we have some support, we have some help, I feel, to start to have certain conversations with our children. We're not about doom and gloom.
Yeah.
We can follow through and say, look at what is being proposed, for example, with the online safety bill in the UK. It's because these things are going to be criminal, they're bad for you,
Yeah.
So can parents use that to start guiding some of their conversations? Could we talk about that a little bit from your perspective?
Sure. And worth saying, Yetty, that whilst a lot of these things are going to take 2 or 3 years to fully come into power, we have now seen the first person in England convicted of cyber flashing, a new offence that was in the bill. So this is a 39-year-old man in Essex who sent unsolicited photos of his erect penis to a 15-year-old girl, and he has been found guilty. He's now a sex offender, and I don't know what the sentence was, but that's really significant. That we're starting to see prosecutions, because I think what that will then do straight away is it will be saying to young men, I'm afraid, in particular, look, you've got to change your behaviour. If you end up as a sex offender, whether or not you're in prison, that means that the rest of your life is blighted in terms of a whole bunch of jobs that you'd be able to do. If anyone does a criminal record check on you because of your employment or for any other reason, they will see that you're a sex offender, and that's not a place that anyone wants to be. And so the culture on Snap or on whatever of sending these pictures to women without them asking for it, I think will change really quite quickly. Now, what else do we need to do while we're waiting for the rest of it to be implemented? But I think there's a urgent need for media literacy. So there's an urgent need for people, not necessarily to go as far as you, Yetty, and going and doing a course, but that just demonstrates your leadership on this. But I think for all of us to compare notes, to understand the business models of these social media companies. Why is it free? It's free because you're the product. It's free because they are capturing your data and they're using the data to personalize advertising at you. And Meta and Google, between them, they channel the vast majority of all the advertising spend in the world now. So they're these big, huge advertising machines, and that's why the product's free, is because you're the product. and so we all need to understand that, and we need our children to understand that, and then we need to then be able to, and to an extent, empathize and have our children empathize and sort of understand that we, when we were discussing this legislation, we used to talk about um, our racist Uncle Bob. And
Mm,
I don't know that I've got an Uncle Bob, and yeah, and certainly don't have a racist Uncle Bob. But
mhm,
the theory of that was, if you've got a racist Uncle Bob might come around at Christmas, and you're all sat around the family table, and he says something offensive and racist, and you all go, "Shut up, Bob.
mhm,
That's offensive," and he shuts up and gets back in his box. Unfortunately, now if Bob says that online, the algorithm will share that with a whole bunch of other people who then share that with a whole bunch of other people. And racist Uncle Bob becomes viral, and that causes a lot of harm.
mm,
And all racist Uncle Bob might have done, uh, to some people, relatively benign, is he might have, and Rio Ferdinand, the former Premier League footballer, came and told us about having to explain to his children why people kept on posting um, emoticons of bananas to
mm,
him on his social media feed. And what was that about?
mm,
Um, that's racist Uncle Bob,
mm,
uh, and uh, and we've got to talk about that. We've got to have that conversation so that people understand that, look, what they're posting in the privacy of their bedroom or whatever, or when they're on the tube, it can be amplified. It's on your record. It can be harmful, and don't share your dark thoughts. We've all of us have been brought up in cultures that make us prejudice against some people, and we judge people, and all of us do it. And most of us have an edit function in our brains that stop that coming out and go, no, that's stupid. Um, that's just the way we've been brought up. But we've moved on, and let's love each other, or whatever our edit function tells us. But let's have a conversation about it. Let's have a conversation um, about how we behave and how we build more trust and love in each other rather than more division and hate.
mm. Yeah, very, very, very powerful. Racist Uncle Bob, that sticks in my head now. you know and I think that leads us to two things, right, which is the fact that there's something called online disinhibition, which means that the way people
Yeah,
behave behind a screen is very different from what you would ever do in person. So you might be the same person
yes,
but two very different personalities, because in front of someone that edit function is live and well. There's certain things you just
yeah,
wouldn't say because this is a human in front of you. You can see body
yeah,
language, you can tell what is inappropriate, but somehow behind
yeah,
screens, that's part of what what it's showing is
yeah,
humans are just different. The same person who can be the best, nicest person in front of you online sheds all of that and becomes a different individual because of the sense of anonymity. They feel they can say anything and get away
yeah,
with it, right?
yeah. And we had quite a lively debate about whether or not you should stop anonymity online on these social platforms so that everyone was traceable. And that was another one of those tricky issues because in in a place like the UK, you might think, well, by and large, we've got a relatively benign state who isn't going to go out and arrest people for opposing them politically. But that doesn't apply around the world. And what we choose to do in the UK is going to be copied and used as justification by other countries and other regimes. And so we were conscious that what we chose to do in the UK, we'd have to be happy if it was happening in Russia, if it was happening in China, if it was happening in an oppressive state somewhere in the world, where people's individual human rights and their ability to say things anonymously as part of their political expression was important.
Mm,
And and so we went against um, getting rid of anonymity. But you're right; it does make people feel emboldened when England go out of a big football tournament and three young black men take the penalties that miss, that mean that they go out. A bunch of anonymous people go online and give them a lot of racist abuse. That's just not okay. Um, and that's people giving into those sort of dark thoughts. They wouldn't do that face to face in front of Bukayo Saka and Marcus Rashford and so on. It's shocking, but it's just a psychological truth.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with that, we start to round up now. I'm also thinking through so there's anonymity, there's a sense of you can say whatever online and seem to get away with it. There's that inability to pause, because however you're feeling doesn't mean it needs to be shared online. And that's where the whole digital footprints come in. Think about what you post, because the internet doesn't forget. So what does that mean, right? Yes, we're balancing it with freedom of speech and expression. However, that doesn't mean that there are not consequences to sharing whatever you feel you're free to share. And I think as a parent, as families, as caregivers, we must make that very clear to the generation that feels I can say whatever I want because it's my truth. It might be your truth, doesn't mean there are not consequences to you sharing truths that you're not thinking about. Is it fair to say? Is it adequate? Is it kind? Is it empathetic? All of that, becomes a whole stream of those conversations.
Yeah, and I think I'm afraid that's going to get harder because of what AI can now do in creating misinformation and distorting truth. So, we saw in a community in Spain, pornographic images of the girls who lived in the village being shared. Now, these weren't real images. They'd been constructed by taking images of girls' faces and then asking AI to manipulate them to create pornographic images that were then being circulated. And that's just a horror story. Now, and that's one of the reasons, incidentally, why a lot of people who run these social media companies don't allow their children to be photographed because they know that there is a price to be paid online with what people can now do with those images. And we just got to be conscious of all of that. As a politician, I've always had this sort of maxim: don't say anything, and especially don't post anything online that you wouldn't be happy to see printed in the Daily Mail, which is a big selling newspaper here in the UK that does not tend to be generous towards politicians. And it's a similar thing. Don't post something that you wouldn't be happy for your mum and dad to see. If you're a teenager in a relationship with someone, and that person asks you to send a nude picture of themselves, well, however tempting it might be, however much you think you might be in love with that person, if that relationship breaks up and that person chooses to then share that image around your classmates, around your school, is that what you want? Would you share that image with your parents? No, you wouldn't. Just keep some things private and keep them human. And just don't do it.
Yeah.
And we have to have those conversations with our kids.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, and they're awkward. But that's just part of being a parent these days, I'm afraid.
Yeah, absolutely right. Because, social media brings out the side of everybody, which is about being, it's very performance based. So it's about the clicks, it's about the likes, it's about being viral. That's the language these children have grown up with. I call it growing up on the social media streets. It's a whole different culture and vibe and what makes you famous and trending. It's deep. It's a whole culture of itself.
Yeah, and it's children saying to me, I want to be an influencer. That's how I want to earn my money. Well, yeah. I mean, there are some people who do that, but that's a really dangerous place to get to. What does that mean in terms of your body image? What does it mean in terms of how you're going to distort what you look like in order to meet what feels like the trend online? there's a whole bunch of things attached to that, which just I find really scary
Yeah.
and pretty horrifying. And part of what growing up in the world these days is a harder, more complex thing than it was when we were growing up. Um, but yeah, uh,
Mm.
I hope our children can have grander ambitions than a few minutes of fame with a lot of likes and going viral and being an influencer. That there is something more substantial that they can do to make the world a better place.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks. So this has been such a great conversation. I've really enjoyed this. And as we start to wrap up, because I always try to make sure that we don't leave parents hearing some of these conversations feeling, oh my God, what am I supposed to do? Where do I even start? This is all bad
Yeah,
news and doom and gloom. I want us to, if you were to give piece of advice around digital literacy, because that's a big part of this. It's digital literacy,
yeah,
digital citizenship, and I call it responsible digital citizenship, right? Your child is not
yeah.
just from wherever they geographically live or they were born. So far, they're online, they're connecting with billions of people online, which means that their view of the world and the shape of who they are is being influenced by billions of people's opinions, right? So
Yeah.
if you were to give in terms of how do we start to come together and say, all right, digital literacy is important. A parent listening to this has no clue where to start from. But I don't believe you can be an effective parent if you're coming from a place of fear. You have to come from a place of empowerment and education. Can you share from your
Yeah.
perspective 3 tips, for example, for a parent who wants to start this conversation around digital literacy and responsible digital citizenship in their family unit?
Well, first of all, as I've said a few times, sit around at the family table and have a conversation as a family about it, because you can be sure that children have things that they're worried about, um, and they might not like having the conversation with their parents about it, but um, on a non-judgmental basis, and perhaps for parents starting with where they accept that their behavior with their phones and digitally leave something to be desired, and start by putting your own hand up and confessing to where you might be spending more time uh, online than you should, or you want to give more attention to your children, or whatever it is. But have the conversation and maybe see if you can start to set a few ground rules. Second thing I'd say is it's really hard to say to a child, especially a teenager, that you want to be able to look at their phone to see what they've been doing, because that feels like a breach of their privacy. But I think it's essential. And with Coco, I mean, we're lucky, I guess, in that she's always known that we've always, in order to keep her safe, we've always got to know with the passcode to her phone that we're an Apple family, so I use iCloud, and so we've got a family account. I control all the permissions to load any app onto her phone. I can control what contacts she allows onto her phone. I control what time of day the phone ceases to be functional, so that it's no longer functional at night. Um, Now I'm perhaps fortunate in that I've got that expertise, or I've taken the time to work out how to make those things work on Apple. But
Mm.
at the right time, go online and find out how to use parent controls on your child's device, and how to try and make them safer. And then make sure, this is an important trick, make sure you don't leave your own phone
Mm.
unlocked around your child, so that they can then go in and change all the settings back. Um, and then just be clear, you are going to go in weekly, monthly, whatever, and just look through the browsing history, look through what the child's been spending their time doing with their phone, how much time they're spending online every day, so that you can then have a conversation about it. Which
Mm.
isn't, this isn't about. I mean, yes, it's an invasion of privacy. I mean, there's no two ways about it. But it is saying, look, if you're going on those sites, I'm not going to judge you for it, but we are going to have a conversation about it. Um, and 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 that's the beginnings of it. And then be curious.
Mm.
I mean, the other thing that I've done, um, and it's not hard to do using the software that comes with the router for our Wi-Fi, is I also set up all of Coco's devices as being child devices, so that the router, so the internet signal coming into the house on the Wi-Fi, knows that those devices have got to be protected um, from certain types of content, and it's just an ongoing battle and an ongoing game um, to try and keep her safe, and she knows that's our agenda, and I think she respects that we're trying to do that, and we keep talking about it. As ever in families, there's no substitute for good communication, open communication. That's what builds love and trust.
Mm. Oh, thanks for sharing those. Start those conversations, start having them, keep having them around digital safety. Um, let your children know that there are going to be parental software installed and they have to know where you're coming from. I like how you said it. It's really about the communication. I'm not here to spy on you, but it's my job as a parent to protect you. And we want the best for you, not the people out there on social media. So we have to protect you. And I like what you said also about being curious, because it can feel overwhelming as a parent, but you have to be curious and you have to lead with, I want to understand this, and I'm understanding this to help my children, myself, and my family, use tech for good. And if you come from that perspective, even I tell my parents sometimes that I work with 5 minutes a day of just Googling what's going on, what's trending, what's happening out there. It gives you the language to be relevant to your children. But if you have no clue what's happening in the digital world, and they see you as a dinosaur who has no clue what's happening in their world, they're never going to bring stuff to you. So you're never going to have a chance as a parent to share your perspective and to help guide them. So those
That's
are
right.
really.
And thank you. And the other thought to just throw in, lots of parents are on WhatsApp groups with other parents of their child's friends. They might be around school, or for clubs, or for whatever reason. And within those groups, maybe occasionally, if there's something that you're not sure about, you're worried about, or you just want to start the conversation about online safety, talk to other parents about it too, because if you can, it's much easier for you if some of the other children who are your child's friends are also having some of these things locked down, and they're being excluded from some of these platforms. So that when your child says, but all of my friends are on WhatsApp, all of my friends are on Snapchat, you go, well, it's not true, because I know, because I've spoken to X, Y, and Z, that they're not allowed on either. And you just get that power of being able to deal with the social pressure and the social dilemma.
Yeah, absolutely right. I think one of the toughest things, I call it being a parent in the e-village. In Africa, we have a proverb that says it takes a village to raise a child. I've modified it to say it takes an e-village to raise a child, because we all have to be parenting our children and our neighbors' children and our friends' children all online. And sometimes it's from seeing what a child posts on social media, it's a red flag. And you can then reach out to another parent and say, hey, I noticed XYZ is posting this type of dark thoughts. There might be something going on there. I know you're not on this platform, but I saw this and I really think you need to have a conversation, right? We need to be able to do that for each other as well. So that peer support is really, really important.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Fantastic.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. This was a really, really enlightening conversation. I learned a lot. Thank you for sharing so many gems. And then one last question before we wrap up. I want to ask you about age verification. So I know
Yeah.
it's one of the things that's going to come in is that, certain content should not be shown to a child on social media, but we do know that many children get these devices and get on these platforms, not always mom and dad know it, and they put a different age just so they can open the
Yeah.
account. So what do we do in that
Yeah.
case where, they're already on there? And even though these platforms are trying to put these controls in place after the fact, if they already have these devices and they've already if they already have these accounts and they've put in an age that makes them a 25-year-old, they are going to be slipping through those. What are your guides or, suggestions around that?
Well, first of all, I think it's unrealistic for us to end up in a system where, in order to register for a whole bunch of sites, you've got to end up showing ID as a child. I think that's a sort of a scary place, because that means tech companies holding lots of data about children that we don't necessarily want them to do. It's also true that even if someone uses a fake ID or puts in a fake age as a child, the tech companies will know really quickly how old they are, because they will know from their behavior online how old they are. They're really good at targeting advertising, because they're really good at knowing who you are and how old you are and what gender you are and what you're interested in. They know how old these users are. So we need the regulator to properly hold them to account and say, whether or not they said they were 25, you know that they're 14. And you've still allowed that through, and we're going to fine you. So we can hold the technology companies to account for what they know. And then what I have been pushing in this country, and we're yet to get there, but I think is obvious, is in order to access anything on one of these phones, you've got to either go through the Apple App Store or the Google App Store. Because there are basically just two platforms, the Android platform and the Apple platform. If we required Apple and Google to verify ID for their app stores, then they can, given that they're the gateway for the mobile internet, they can act as the age verification body, so that when you download any app onto a particular device, Apple or Google knows the age of the device user and will prevent that app being downloaded if it's inappropriate. Simple. And that's the way I would do it.
That is very helpful and clear, actually, in terms of let's not get stuck in the woods of, oh my God, how do we verify? There's so many other ways that could easily be tackled. Fantastic. Yeah. Thank you so much, Jim. I really am glad you were able to join us today and we had this conversation. I think for anybody who listens to this, no matter where you are in the spectrum in terms of, are you quite digitally savvy already as a parent? Are you already putting these things in place, or are you just starting out? I definitely think this conversation has something for everybody to pick away and realize you are not alone. You're right. That's the beautiful thing about this. You're not alone. And so there's many, many people who are also navigating this new digital age together. Fantastic.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Yetty. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. And if anyone wanted to get in touch with you, are you, in terms of, are you on socials, the work that you're doing, is there any way to kind of follow you and see what's going on?
Yeah, so I'm more active on LinkedIn than I am on the other socials. I've got a private group of friends that I post a few pictures on Insta, but I don't have that as a public account. I do have a public account on X, the platform that used to be known as Twitter, and people can follow me on there, but I'm not that active on Twitter anymore because I'm not a big fan of it. and I've more or less given up on Facebook. So LinkedIn probably is the best place.
Fantastic. I'll put all of that in the show notes for if anyone wants to kind of,
Great.
Follow your thought leadership in this space. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Terrific.
Have a fantastic day and week ahead.
Thank you.
And hope to be in touch
And
soon.
you.
Yeah.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining and listening today. I hope you've picked quite a few things away from this conversation. In my capacity as a digital parenting coach, helping parents navigate the digital world, raising their children to be more responsible in the digital world. There's a lot of work to do. It can feel overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be. And I say that because if parents come from a place of fear and feel that they cannot navigate this world, then the children are being left all by themselves to make sense of it from their peers. And that is really dangerous. As Jim shared with us, there's a lot of work going on, particularly from his perspective in the UK, but globally, we're starting to see definitely there's a lot more conversations happening about how do we actually protect our children online. So if you want to learn more, feel free to get in touch with me if you would like to have a conversation around digital citizenship, digital well-being, how to make sure your family, your parents, your parenting rather, your children are being prepared to be successful, to be safe, and to use technology and digital for good. You can follow me at LagosMums on all the social media platforms. You can visit our website, LagosMums.com, that has a lot of articles around parenting, and particularly we have a category around technology and parenting. And on my personal handle, you can follow me at Yetty Williams, where I'm also, having conversations and speaking regularly about digital well-being in the digital age. And if you haven't yet subscribed, be sure to subscribe to our Lagos Mums channel on YouTube for conversations such as this. Have a great day. Thanks for being here. Bye-bye now.